Javier Ramos, a single-dad janitor struggling to make ends meet, had just been fired. His only crime was bringing his 7-year-old daughter, Luna, to work after his sitter had a last-minute emergency. Now, standing in the middle of a corporate war room during a multi-million-dollar server crash, he faced the cold fury of the company's formidable CEO, Miranda Ellison. The words still hung in the Arctic chilled air, sharp as shards of glass. "Get that child out of here, and you're fired." Just minutes before, he'd been mopping the hallway on the 48th floor, his mind on the rent check he had to write tomorrow. He'd left Luna in a small, forgotten break room with her coloring book, her favorite worn-out teddy bear, and a stern warning to stay put. But the building's emergency alarm, a low, pervasive hum that made your teeth vibrate, had sent her running to find him. Her search ended here, in the glass-walled, glowing heart of Auratech's catastrophic failure. The room was a sea of panicked faces, all focused on a wall-sized screen filled with cascading red error codes. Miranda Ellison stood at its center, a black-suited general directing a losing battle. And when her eyes had landed on Luna, a small, pink-sneakered anomaly in her sterile world of code, her expression had hardened from controlled fury to outright contempt. Now, with the verdict delivered, Javier felt the floor tilt beneath him. This midnight-to-dawn job was their lifeline, keeping the lights on and buying Luna's school lunches. He started to stammer an explanation, but Miranda had already turned away, dismissing him like a piece of trash. Shame burned in his chest. He took Luna's small, trembling hand. "Come on, mija," he whispered, his voice thick. "Let's go." But Luna wouldn't budge. She was staring past the angry CEO, past the frantic engineers, her eyes fixed on the giant screen. Her head was tilted, her brow furrowed in concentration. She tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy," she said, her voice small but clear. "The picture is wrong." "Luna, please," Javier begged, his heart cracking. "Not now. We have to leave the blue wire," she insisted, raising a small hand to point. "It's in the wrong port." The lead engineer, a man whose face was pale with exhaustion, let out a short, bitter laugh. "Great. Now we're getting tech support from a first grader." The stressed-out engineers scoffed. A few shook their heads, turning back to their keyboards with annoyed sighs. To them, she was an absurd distraction in the middle of a disaster. Javier tried to pull her away again, desperate to escape the humiliation. "Sweetheart, these people are busy." "Wait!" Miranda Ellison's voice cut through the room, silencing everything. The scoffing, the typing, the frantic energy. Everyone froze. She turned slowly, her gaze no longer on Javier, but on his daughter. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice low and dangerously calm. Luna flinched but stood her ground, still pointing. "The blue one. It's in box B9, but I saw it before, on another man's computer downstairs. He had the same picture up. It was in B7. 7 is my lucky number, so I remember." The engineers exchanged glances of disbelief. Ben, the lead, stepped forward cautiously. "Miss Ellison, with all due respect, that's a primary network cable. We've run diagnostics on the entire software stack. The problem isn't a misplaced wire." "Are you certain?" Miranda challenged, her eyes still locked on the screen. "Are you 100% certain that a problem you failed to solve for 2 hours couldn't possibly be the one thing you overlooked?" Ben opened his mouth, then closed it. Miranda's gaze shifted to him, cold and sharp. "You've tried it your way. Now try it hers. Check the cable." Looking as if he'd been ordered to jump from the window, Ben nodded to a junior technician. "Rack 4. Check the patch for NC Blue." The room held a collective breath as the young man pried a panel from a humming server tower. He shone a light inside, his eyes widening. He swallowed hard. She's right. My God. The cable is in B9. A shockwave of murmurs went through the room. "Move it," Miranda commanded. A soft click echoed in the silent room. "It's done," the technician called out. "It's in B7. For 3 eternal seconds, nothing happened. The screen of red error codes remained. Javier's stomach twisted into a knot. Then, the screen went black. A woman gasped. Suddenly, it lit up again, bathed in a brilliant solid green. Words flashed across the top in crisp white letters. "System stable, network online." Cheers and relieved laughter erupted through the war room. Engineers slumped against their consoles, rubbing their eyes as if waking from a nightmare. The crisis was over. The multi-million-dollar-an-hour bleed had stopped. And it had all been because his daughter remembered her lucky number. In the midst of the celebration, Miranda Ellison walked back over to them. The engineers quieted as she approached, her presence reasserting its authority. She looked down at Luna, who was now hiding shyly behind Javier's leg. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice softer than before, though no less intense. "Luna," she whispered. Miranda looked up at Javier. The anger in her eyes was gone, replaced by a sharp, calculating curiosity that sent a shiver down his spine. She had fired him. He was a non-entity, a janitor, but his daughter had just done the impossible. He waited for her to say something, to demand an explanation. Instead, she gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. "The order is rescinded," she said, her voice returning to its clipped, professional tone. "You're not fired." She paused, her eyes lingering on Luna for a fraction of a second too long. Yet. With that, she turned and strode back into the throng of her employees, immediately barking out a new set of orders. Javier stood there, rooted to the spot, invisible once more. He should have felt a wave of relief, but all he felt was a cold dread. He had gotten his job back, but he had a terrible feeling he had just lost something far more important: his anonymity. He had brought his daughter into the shark's tank, and she had just proven she could swim. Now he was terrified the shark would want to know why. The rest of Javier's shift passed in a blur. He pushed his cart through the silent hallways, his hands on autopilot while his mind replayed the scene in the war room. Luna, exhausted, was back in the break room with a security guard posted outside the door. A gesture from Miranda that felt less like kindness and more like control. He checked on her to find her fast asleep, head pillowed on her teddy bear, oblivious. He finished his duties just as dawn painted the sky. As he and a sleepy Luna rode the service elevator down, the silence between them was heavy. "Daddy," Luna mumbled, leaning her head against his arm, "is the lady still mad at us?" "No, mija, I don't think she's mad anymore." "Is she a queen?" She looked like a queen from my storybooks. "The mean kind. She's the boss, sweetheart. The biggest boss in the whole building." He squeezed her hand. "We just need to make sure we stay out of her way from now on, okay?" "Okay," Luna agreed, though she didn't sound convinced. But the picture was still wrong. That was the terrifying part. To Luna, it was simple. She saw a mistake and corrected it. But Javier knew that in a world of hierarchies and power, a janitor's daughter didn't just correct the biggest boss in the building. It was a violation of the natural order, and he was terrified of the consequences. Upstairs on the 50th floor, Miranda Ellison stood in her cavernous office, ignoring the waking city below. She stared at a bank of monitors, replaying the security footage of the incident for the 4th time. She watched herself fire the janitor, then watched the little girl, Luna, point at the main screen. Miranda zoomed in, tracing the child's finger. The footage was silent, but she remembered the words perfectly. The blue wire. "It's in the wrong port." It made no sense. It was an anomaly, a data point that didn't fit the logical patterns she had built her career on predicting. A child's lucky number was not verifiable data. She minimized the video and pulled up Javier Ramos's sparse employee file. Hired 2 years ago, perfect attendance, no commendations or disciplinary actions. A widower. A single photo showed a tired man with kind eyes, nothing to suggest he was raising a prodigy. She leaned back in her chair, tapping a finger on her desk. The girl, Luna, had seen a schematic for no more than a few seconds, yet she'd retained a specific critical detail that a team of highly paid experts had overlooked for hours. It wasn't just memory. It was pattern recognition of an extraordinary level. Miranda's father had raised her on a diet of logic and discipline. "Emotion is a weakness, Miranda," he used to say, his voice a cold instrument of instruction. "Success is a fortress. You build it brick by logical brick, and you leave no room for sentiment." She had lived by that code. It had made her strong, successful, and utterly alone. And now, a 7-year-old girl had just punched a hole in the wall of her fortress with nothing more than a lucky number. The incident couldn't be ignored. It had to be understood, quantified. She pressed a button on her desk intercom. "Sylvia, are you in yet?" Her assistant's voice came back instantly, crisp and efficient. "Yes, Ms. Ellison. I'm sending you an employee number, 7432. He has a 7-year-old daughter. I want a top-of-the-line AuraPad configured for her age group, loaded with our most advanced cognitive development and pattern recognition software. Have it couriered to his address this afternoon." There was a half-second of silence on the other end. Sylvia had been with her for 5 years and knew better than to question her, but this request was far outside the norm. "Of course, Miss Ellison. Is there a message to be included?" Miranda stared out at the rising sun. A gift could be misconstrued as kindness, as emotion. This was not that. This was an experiment, a probe sent into uncharted territory. "Yes," Miranda said. "The note should read, 'For a keen eye. Sign it with my initial.'" That afternoon, a sharp knock came at Javier's door. He opened it to find a courier holding a sleek, silver box with the Auratech logo embossed on the front. Javier's hand trembled as he signed for it. He took the box, his mind racing. He closed the door and placed the box on the table as if it might be a bomb. "What is it, Daddy?" Luna asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. He carefully sliced the tape and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in foam, was a brand-new AuraPad, the kind he'd seen advertised on billboards for over $1,000. Beneath it was a small envelope. He opened it and pulled out a heavy cream-colored card. The note was written in elegant, sharp handwriting. "For a keen eye." Monsieur Javier dropped the card as if it had burned him. "Monsieur Miranda." "Wow," Luna breathed, reaching for the tablet. "Is it for me?" Javier's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't a thank you gift. It wasn't a bonus. It was a message. It was a leash. It was the shark, circling, wanting to know more about the strange creature she discovered in her waters. He looked at the tablet, an alien artifact on their worn kitchen table, then at his daughter, her face alight with innocent excitement. Miranda Ellison hadn't forgotten about them. She was watching. And Javier knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was only the beginning. For 2 days, the silver box sat on the kitchen counter, a silent, gleaming accusation. Javier didn't know what to do with it. Returning it felt like an act of defiance he couldn't afford. Keeping it felt like accepting a bargain whose terms he didn't understand. Luna, however, had no such reservations. She orbited the box constantly, her questions relentless. "Can I open it, Daddy? Is it really for me? Does this mean the Queen isn't mean anymore?" Finally, on the 3rd day, Javier relented. His daughter's hopeful, pleading eyes were a force he could never resist. With a sigh of resignation, he powered on the AuraPad. The screen lit up with a brilliant display. It wasn't filled with the usual cartoonish games. Instead, the home screen was populated with sleek icons for apps with names like Cognitologic, Pattern Matrix, and Synapse Flow. Javier tapped on one, and a complex puzzle involving shifting geometric shapes appeared. It looked like something from a college entrance exam. "I want to try," Luna said, climbing onto his lap. He handed her the device, expecting her to get bored in seconds. Instead, she tilted her head, her finger hovering over the screen. After a moment of intense concentration, she began to move the shapes. With a series of swift, intuitive taps, she solved the puzzle. A pleasant chime sounded, and a more complex puzzle appeared. She solved that one too. Javier watched, a knot of awe and dread tightening in his stomach. He didn't understand the puzzles, but he understood he was watching something extraordinary. This tablet wasn't a toy. It was a test, and his daughter was passing with flying colors. Meanwhile, on the 50th floor, Miranda Ellison was facing a different kind of test. "The projections are clear, Miranda," Camden Pryor said, his voice smooth as steel as he leaned forward. "Executing Project Scythe, cutting 20% of staff, will boost our profit margin by 8%. The board will be ecstatic." Camden was ambitious, ruthless, and everything Miranda's father had admired. He saw employees as numbers on a spreadsheet, and he was the biggest threat to her position. "I've seen the projections, Camden," Miranda said, her tone flat. She swiveled her chair to face the window, presenting him with her back. "I'm reviewing the departmental reports. The cuts need to be strategic, not just a blunt instrument." Camden's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Getting soft, Miranda? I heard you personally intervened to stop a janitor from being fired the other night. Word is his kid gave our tech department a tip." He chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "We can't let office gossip dictate our corporate strategy." Miranda turned back to face him, her expression a mask of ice. "What my team and I do to solve a crisis is my business. And that janitor is still an employee of this company. His personnel file is confidential." She paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "Are we clear?" Camden raised his hands in mock surrender. "Crystal, I'm just saying, appearances matter. The board wants to see the same decisive leader who took this company to the top. They don't want to see someone distracted by charity cases." The dig was deliberate and precise. After he left, Miranda stared at the door to her office for a long time. Camden was right about one thing. She was distracted. The girl, Luna, was a puzzle she couldn't solve, an illogical variable that consumed her thoughts. Was it weakness? Or was it something else? At work, Javier was no longer invisible. His co-workers treated him with a mixture of newfound respect and suspicion. He'd hear whispers as he walked by. "That's him, the guy whose kid saved the launch. I heard the CEO gave his daughter a $1,000 computer." He tried to keep his head down, but he was marked. He was no longer one of them, but the CEO's special project. The thought made him sick. He and Luna fell into a new routine. He would work, and she would sit in the break room, utterly absorbed in the Aurapad. She flew through the puzzles and cognitive games, her mind working at a speed that baffled him. He would watch her sometimes, this small, quiet girl who could see the world in a way no one else could, and a fierce, protective fear would seize him. He had to protect her. But how could he protect her from someone as powerful as Miranda Ellison? The answer came on a Thursday night. Javier was wiping down the chrome fixtures in the 48th floor men's room when his pocket buzzed. It was an internal call from the 50th floor. His heart leaped into his throat. He answered, his hand trembling. Javier Ramos speaking. "Mr. Ramos, this is Sylvia, Miss Ellison's executive assistant." The voice was crisp and professional. "Please hold." He held his breath. A moment later, a different voice came on the line. "Mr. Ramos?" Miranda Ellison said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am," he managed to say. "I understand your daughter is here with you this evening." "Yes, ma'am. She's in the break room. I'd like to thank her in person for her assistance the other night. Please bring her up to my office." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. The moment he had been dreading had arrived. He was being pulled from the shadows and into the shark's lair. "Now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Now," Miranda confirmed, and the line went dead. Javier stood frozen in the empty restroom, the scent of disinfectant sharp in his nostrils. The choice he thought he had was an illusion. He couldn't run, he couldn't hide, and he couldn't say no. Miranda Ellison wanted to see his daughter, and he had no power in the world to stop her. The ride up to the 50th floor was in a different elevator. Not the freight elevator Javier used, but a passenger elevator made of glass and brushed steel. It ascended in a smooth, silent rush, the city lights spreading out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. Luna pressed her face to the glass, her breath fogging a small patch. "We're so high, Daddy," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "We're higher than the birds." Javier's stomach was a tight, churning knot. He felt like they were ascending to a different world, one where they didn't belong and the air was too thin to breathe. The elevator doors opened directly into a quiet, plush reception area. A single woman sat behind a large white desk. It was Sylvia, the assistant from the phone. She offered them a polite, professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Ramos Luna, Miss Ellison is waiting for you." She led them down a wide, gallery-like hallway with stark white walls and large, abstract paintings to two massive wooden doors. Sylvia gestured them inside. Miranda Ellison's office was less a room and more a territory. It was vast and silent, with a floor-to-ceiling wall of windows showcasing a breathtaking view of the city. The furniture was sparse and severe. A black desk of polished obsidian, two sharp-angled chairs, and nothing else. No photos, no plants, no personal touches. A space designed for command, not comfort. Miranda was standing by the window, her back to them. "Come in," she said, without turning around. Javier guided Luna into the room, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. The door clicked shut behind them, amplifying the silence. Miranda finally turned. She had removed her suit jacket, and she wore a simple, elegant silk blouse. She looked less like a CEO and more like a general in her command center. "Luna," she said, her voice softer than Javier had ever heard it. "Thank you for coming." She gestured to the two chairs in front of her desk. "Please, sit." Javier sat stiffly on the edge of the chair, which was surprisingly uncomfortable. Luna, however, hopped up and sat with her legs swinging, her eyes taking in every detail of the cavernous room. Miranda walked around her desk and sat opposite them, her posture perfect. "I wanted to thank you for your help the other night. You have a very special talent." She looked at Luna with an intense, analytical gaze. "The Aura Pad. Are you enjoying it?" Luna nodded enthusiastically. "It's the best. The puzzles are fun. They're like maps, but with shapes. You just have to see where they want to go." Miranda's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched slightly. "Where they want to go. That's an interesting way to put it." She leaned forward, linking her fingers on the pristine surface of her desk. "Javier. May I call you Javier?" At his nervous nod, she continued. "Your daughter's file at school. Does it mention anything about her abilities? Has she been tested?" "Tested for what?" Javier asked, his protective instincts flaring. "She's a little girl. She's smart. She likes to read." That's all. Miranda held his gaze. "She has an eidetic memory and advanced spatial reasoning skills. That's more than just smart. That's a gift." Before Javier could respond, Luna spoke up, her small voice cutting through the tension. "Why is your office so empty?" she asked, looking around. "Don't you have any pictures of your family?" The question was so direct, so innocent, that it seemed to physically startle Miranda. A flicker of something, surprise, pain, Javier couldn't tell, crossed her face before the mask of composure slipped back into place. "My family is not with me anymore," she said, her voice clipped. "And I find that personal effects are a distraction from work." "Oh," Luna said, looking down at her swinging feet. "That's sad." An uncomfortable silence descended. To break it, Miranda turned her large monitor towards them. "I'm working on a new project," she said, changing the subject. "A new interface for our mobile devices. This is a prototype of the user flow chart. On the screen was a diagram more complex than the server schematic. a web of interconnected boxes mapping every possible user action. "We're trying to optimize the pathway for a new feature," Miranda explained, pointing. "The goal is to get from here to here in the fewest steps. My best team says 7 clicks. Do you see a faster way?" Javier stared at the screen. It was an incomprehensible mess to him. He felt a surge of anger. She was testing her, using his 7-year-old daughter like one of her fancy computers. But Luna wasn't looking at it like a test. She was looking at it like one of her puzzles. She slid off her chair and walked closer to the desk, her nose almost touching the screen. She traced a path through the maze with her finger, not touching the monitor but hovering just above it. "You can go from here," she whispered, her finger zigzagging, "to here, and then you can skip all these boxes and go straight here, because this box does the same thing as this box over here. They're just wearing different hats." She looked up at Miranda. "It's 4 steps." Miranda stared at the screen, then back at Luna. She leaned in, her eyes following the path Luna had traced. A slow, dawning look of comprehension spread across her face. She picked up her desk phone and pressed a button. "Get me David in UI development," she commanded. A moment later, she was speaking. "David, pull up the Project Omni flowchart. Yes, now. Look at the path from user registration to payment verification. Why is there a redundant authentication loop in subroutine Gamma? It's the same protocol as the primary login verification. How did your entire team miss that?" She listened for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Fix it." She hung up the phone and looked at Luna. The analytical curiosity in her eyes was gone, replaced by something that looked unnervingly like awe. "They're wearing different hats," she murmured to herself. "Incredible." Javier felt a cold dread spread through him. This was worse than he thought. Miranda didn't just see Luna as a curiosity. She saw her as an asset, a tool. "We should go," Javier said abruptly, standing up. "It's getting late." Miranda seemed to snap out of a trance. "Of course." As she turned the monitor back towards herself, the flow chart was replaced by a different screen. It was a massive spreadsheet, a list of names. Javier recognized the header instantly. Project Scythe, Personnel Reductions. Luna's eyes, drawn by the movement, landed on the list. "Wow, that's a lot of names," she said. "Are all those people getting a prize?" The innocent question hit the silent room like a thunderclap. Javier saw Miranda flinch, a barely perceptible tightening in her jaw. The woman who could fire hundreds of people without a second thought looked down at her list of names, then back at the small child in her office. For the first time, she seemed to see them not as data points, but as people. "Something like that," Miranda said, her voice strained. She stood up, her composure regained. "Sylvia will see you out." Javier took Luna's hand and practically fled the office. As the heavy doors closed behind them, he felt like he had just escaped the gravitational pull of a dying star. Left alone in her silent, empty office, Miranda stared at her layoff list. The names blurred in front of her eyes. She heard the child's voice echoing in the vast space. "Are they getting a prize?" She reached into a locked drawer in her desk and took out a thick, yellowed envelope. Her father's last letter, still sealed. She held it in her hand, the paper cool against her skin. For the first time in a very long time, the walls of her fortress felt less like a defense and more like a cage. The following night, the entire 48th floor felt charged with a strange energy. Javier kept his head down, pushing his mop with a mechanical rhythm, but he could feel the weight of Miranda Ellison's attention from 2 floors above. He had instructed Luna to stay in the break room, to not leave for any reason, and she had solemnly promised. But the promise felt fragile, like a spider's web against a coming storm. Miranda was trapped in cognitive dissonance. For years, she had lived by her father's logic. The company was a machine, people were cogs, and the inefficient must be removed. It was a simple, clean philosophy that had been her shield and her sword. But Luna's question, "Are they getting a prize?" had thrown sand in the gears. The phrase mocked her spreadsheet, Now, when she looked at the names for Project Scythe, she saw faces. "The board is getting anxious, Miranda." Camden Pryor's voice cut through her thoughts. He had appeared in her doorway, leaning against the frame with his usual predatory grace. "They're expecting the final list by Friday. Any longer and they'll think you're losing your nerve." "I'm finalizing the strategic analysis," Miranda said, her voice colder than she felt. "This requires precision, not haste." "Of course," Camden purred, his eyes glinting. "Wouldn't want to accidentally fire anyone with a special talent." He smirked. "I'm heading out." "Don't work too late, you'll get wrinkles." His words, meant to be a casual barb, hit their mark. He knew she was wavering. He was circling, waiting for her to stumble. Hours later, the building was silent. The city lights glittered outside her window, a cold and distant beauty. The pressure was immense. The board on one side, Camden on the other, and the ghost of her father's expectations all around her. She felt like she was suffocating. Her hand, as if with a will of its own, went to the locked drawer. She pulled out the yellowed envelope. Her father's handwriting, sharp and angular like his voice, spelled out her name. For 15 years since his death, this letter had been her last link to him, and she had been too afraid or too stubborn to open it. Afraid of his final command, or perhaps his final disappointment. Tonight, the paper felt heavier than ever. Her composure finally broke. A dry, ragged sob escaped her lips. Javier was cleaning the executive reception area, the quiet hum of his floor polisher the only sound. He'd told Luna to wait for him on the bench just down the hall, well away from the CEO's office. But when he finished and turned around, the bench was empty. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. "Luna?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. He rushed down the hall and stopped dead. The massive doors to Miranda's office were slightly ajar. A sliver of light spilled out onto the plush carpet. Pushing the door open, his heart pounding, he saw a scene that made no sense. Miranda was sitting at her desk, her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. The formidable, unshakable CEO was weeping. And standing beside her chair, her small hand resting gently on Miranda's arm, was Luna. "It's okay," Luna was saying softly. "My daddy cries sometimes when he misses my mommy." He says it's just the love leaking out of his eyes. Javier felt rooted to the spot, horrified and amazed. Miranda lifted her head, her face pale and tear-streaked. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the envelope on her desk. Luna's gaze followed hers. "Is that from someone in heaven?" she asked. Miranda nodded, unable to speak. "My teacher says we keep people alive by remembering them," Luna said, her tone serious and wise. "But sometimes we remember the sad parts so much, we forget the happy parts." She looked from the letter to Miranda's face. Javier held his breath, ready to rush in and scoop her up. "Forgiving isn't a weakness," Luna said, her voice so clear it seemed to echo in the silent office. "Just like regret isn't a weakness either. I think you should read your father's last words. After all, he was living this life for the first time, too." The words, so simple and yet so profound, hung in the air. Javier felt the sting of tears in his own eyes. Miranda stared at Luna, her expression of grief slowly melting into one of sheer, unadulterated shock. "Luna," Javier finally found his voice, stepping into the room. "I am so sorry, Ms. Ellison. She promised she would wait." He reached for his daughter's hand. "Wait!" Miranda's voice was a choked whisper. She held up a hand, not in anger, but to stop him. She looked at Luna, truly looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Then her gaze dropped to the letter. With a trembling hand, she picked it up. "You can go now, Javier," she said, her voice strangely fragile. "Both of you. It's all right." He hesitated, then nodded. pulling a very confused Luna out of the office and gently closing the heavy doors behind him. Alone again, Miranda stared at the sealed envelope. He was living this life for the first time, too. The child's simple observation had unlocked something in her, a permission she had never given herself. Her fingers, clumsy with emotion, tore open the seal. She unfolded the single sheet of brittle, yellowed paper. "My dearest Miranda, if you are reading this, it means the machine has finally stopped. I find I'm more afraid of leaving you with my legacy than I am of dying. I taught you to be strong, to be logical, to be ruthless. I see now that I was teaching you to be me. That was a terrible mistake. Your mother, she was the heart of my world. When she died, I was so afraid of that pain. I built walls of ambition and logic around my own heart and, I'm afraid, around yours. I pushed you to succeed, to conquer, because I didn't know how to teach you to be happy. I confused respect with love. I confused power with safety. I see your mother's heart in you, Miranda. I see it every time you look at a problem with compassion before you look at it with logic. I tried to train that out of you, to make you a shark like me. I was a fool. A shark is a magnificent creature, but it is doomed to always keep moving and to live in the cold dark. You were meant for the sun. Don't make my mistakes. Don't let the fortress become a prison. The greatest risk in life is not failure, but a success that costs you your soul. Lead with your mother's heart. That is my last and only command. Forgive me. I love you. Dad. The letter fell from her trembling fingers. A dam inside her that had been built over 15 years of grief and anger and regret finally burst. She buried her face in her hands and wept. She cried for the father she had lost, for the mother she barely remembered, and for the woman she had forced herself to become. After a long time, the tears subsided, leaving an aching emptiness that slowly filled with a strange, new sense of clarity. She wiped her eyes and looked at her computer screen, where the Project Scythe spreadsheet still glowed. The list of names, the cogs in the machine. Her father was wrong about one thing. A shark couldn't live in the sun, but it could choose which waters to swim in, and it could choose what to protect. With a new steely resolve in her eyes, she moved her mouse and dragged the entire Project Scythe file into the trash. The woman who walked into Oratech the next morning was not the same one who had left. Outwardly, she was identical. Impeccable suit, severe bun, confident stride. But Sylvia, her assistant, noticed it immediately. There was a lightness in her step, a warmth in her eyes that hadn't been there before. When Sylvia handed her the morning briefing, Miranda smiled. A genuine, unforced smile. It was so unexpected that Sylvia almost dropped the files. "Thank you, Sylvia," Miranda said. "Please ask the executive team to meet me in the main boardroom in 1 hour. All of them." An hour later, Miranda stood at the head of a long, polished table, looking at the faces of her senior VPs. Camden Pryor was seated to her right, a look of smug anticipation on his face. He assumed this was the meeting where she would finally hand over the execution orders for Project Scythe. "Good morning," Miranda began, her voice calm and clear. "Thank you all for coming. I'm sure you're all anticipating the final directives for Project Scythe. I've reviewed the data, the projections, and the strategic analyses." She paused, letting the tension build, her eyes sweeping across the room and landing on Camden. "And I've come to a decision. Project Scythe is cancelled." A stunned silence fell over the boardroom. VPs exchanged confused, shocked glances. Camden's smug expression vanished, replaced by a mask of disbelief. "Cancelled?" he sputtered, finding his voice first. "Miranda, the board approved the initiative. We're projected to save over $50 million a quarter. The projection was based on a flawed premise," Miranda stated calmly. "It calculated the cost of salaries, but not the value of experience, loyalty, and innovation. It treated our employees as liabilities, not as our single greatest asset." She looked around the table. Effective immediately. We are shifting our focus from personnel reduction to talent investment. I'll be presenting a new initiative to the board next week. This meeting is adjourned." She turned and walked out, leaving a room full of chaos and confusion behind her. Camden Pryor was shaking with rage. This wasn't a strategic pivot. It was a complete dereliction of duty. She had lost her nerve. Worse, she had lost her mind. And he was certain he knew the cause: the janitor's daughter. The girl was a virus that had infected Miranda's logic, filling her head with sentimental nonsense about assets and value. He stormed back to his office, his mind racing. The board would never stand for this. He could go to them, of course, but he needed more than just her canceling one project. He needed concrete proof that her judgment was compromised. He needed to eliminate the source of the infection. He needed to get rid of the janitor. His plan was simple and cruel. He found the night shift cleaning schedules and saw that Javier Ramos was assigned to the R&D labs on the 45th floor that evening. Those labs contained sensitive, multi-million-dollar prototypes. A little negligence there could have catastrophic consequences. That night, Javier felt a cautious sense of hope for the first time in weeks. The encounter in Miranda's office had been terrifying, but the way she had looked at Luna, the way she had dismissed him so gently, made him feel like maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. He worked with a renewed focus, taking extra care. He entered the R&D labs just after 3 a.m. The labs were clean, quiet, and filled with strange technology. He carefully emptied the trash and wiped down the surfaces in the main area before moving to Lab 45B, a smaller room where a new holographic display prototype was housed. As per the strict cleaning protocols, he used the company-issued pH-neutral cleansing spray on the work surfaces, carefully avoiding the delicate machinery itself. He finished his work, locked the lab door behind him, and moved on. An hour later, as he was cleaning the break room on the opposite side of the building, the emergency alarm went off. It wasn't the low hum from before, but a series of sharp, piercing shrieks that meant a hazardous material alert. Red lights flashed in the hallway. Before he could even process what was happening, 2 security guards were flanking him. "Mr. Ramos," one said, his voice grim, "you need to come with us." His heart pounded against his ribs as they led him back towards the R&D labs. A small crowd had gathered, more security, a few late-night engineers, and standing in the center of it all, looking grave and authoritative, was Camden Pryor. Camden pointed toward the now open door of Lab 45B. He was the last one inside, Camden announced to the head of security. "He cleaned the lab less than an hour ago." Javier's blood ran cold. He peered into the lab. On the main console beneath the holographic prototype, a section of the metal casing was bubbling and corroded. A small, ugly stain was spreading across the sensitive control panel. "Initial assessment suggests an acidic chemical spill," the security chief said, reading from a tablet. "The damage to the prototype's control board is significant. It could set the project back by months." "What kind of cleaning fluids do you use?" Camden asked, turning to Javier. His voice was filled with a false, exaggerated concern. "Just the standard spray," Javier stammered, his mind reeling. "The G14 neutral spray. It's all we're allowed to use in the labs. It's basically just filtered water. It couldn't do that." Camden walked over to Javier's cleaning cart. He rummaged through the supplies and pulled out a different bottle, a heavy-duty industrial solvent used for stripping paint. He held it up for everyone to see. The bottle was nearly empty. "This wasn't on your cart an hour ago, Mr. Ramos," Camden said, his voice dripping with false disappointment. "This is a highly corrosive agent. Using it in a sensitive lab is an act of gross, catastrophic negligence." Javier stared at the bottle, his mouth agape. He had never seen it before in his life. Someone had planted it. He looked around at the accusing faces, the engineers glaring at him, the security guards watching his every move. He was trapped. "I didn't," Javier whispered, his voice shaking. "I swear, I didn't use that." Someone put it there. Camden let out a heavy sigh. He put a hand on Javier's shoulder, a gesture of faux sympathy that felt like a snake coiling around his neck. "It's all right, Javier. People make mistakes." He turned to the head of security. "Secure the area. I'll inform Ms. Ellison myself that her favorite janitor may have just cost this company $10 million. The words hit Javier with the force of a physical blow. Her favorite janitor. It was all a setup. This wasn't about a chemical spill. It was an attack on Miranda, and he was the weapon being used against her. He looked into Camden Pryor's triumphant eyes and saw the cold, ruthless logic of the shark he was trying to be. He was just a cog in the machine, and he was about to be removed. Javier felt the world shrink to the small, sterile space of the laboratory hallway. The flashing red lights painted the accusing faces around him in a demonic glow. Camden's words, her favorite janitor, echoed in his ears, confirming his worst fears. He wasn't just being fired. He was being used as a pawn in a game so far above his head, he couldn't even see the board. "I didn't do it," Javier insisted, his voice cracking. "That bottle wasn't on my cart. I swear it." Camden shook his head with a look of theatrical pity. "Security will conduct a full investigation, of course, but the evidence seems pretty clear." The head of security, a humorless man named Croft, gestured to his guards. "Take Mr. Ramos to the security office. We'll need a formal statement." Javier felt a rough hand on his arm. This was it. He was going to be arrested, lose his job, and Luna. A wave of nausea washed over him. What would happen to Luna? That won't be necessary. The voice, calm and impossibly controlled, cut through the hallway like a laser. The guards froze. The engineers turned. Camden's triumphant expression faltered. Miranda Ellison stood at the end of the hall, her pace deliberate as she walked towards them, each step reclaiming her authority. Her eyes were fixed on the scene, absorbing every detail: the damaged console, the solvent bottle on the cart, and the triumphant look on Camden Pryor's face. "Miranda," Camden said, recovering quickly, "I was just about to call you. A terrible situation. Gross negligence on the part of your janitor. The damage is extensive." Miranda stopped in front of the lab door, her gaze sweeping over the corroded panel. "I see that," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. She turned to Croft. "Report." Last person inside the lab was employee Javier Ramos, from 3:10 to 3:22, Croft read from his tablet. Hazard alarm was triggered at 4:15. A container of C4 industrial solvent was found on his cart. Initial analysis of the residue on the console is consistent with that solvent. Miranda listened without interruption, her eyes on Javier. He saw no sympathy in her expression, only an intense, unnerving focus. He felt a fresh wave of despair. She was going to fire him. After all that, she would see him as a liability and cut him loose. "Mr. Ramos," she said, her voice sharp, "did you use that solvent in this lab?" "No, Ms. Ellison," Javier said, his voice shaking but earnest. "I have never used that chemical in my life. It's for the maintenance crews in the basement. I only use the standard G14 spray." "I swear on my daughter's life." Miranda's gaze flickered at the mention of his daughter. Camden saw it too and seized the opportunity. "Miranda, it's an open and shut case," he interjected smoothly. "Perhaps the man is under some personal stress. It's a shame, but we have to protect the company. Your recent leniency may have sent the wrong message, made him careless." It was a perfectly aimed barb, meant to force her hand, to make her prove she was still the ruthless leader they all knew. Instead of answering, Miranda turned back to the security chief. "Where is the requisition log for the C4 solvent?" Croft blinked, surprised by the question. I'm not sure." "It's kept in the sub-level chemical storage." "Get it," Miranda ordered. "I want to know who is signed for that chemical in the past 48 hours. I also want all security footage from this hallway, the service elevators, and the stairwells on this floor, going back 12 hours. Camden's calm demeanor tightened almost imperceptibly at the corners of his eyes. Isn't that a bit excessive? The man's cart is right there. An investigation is, by definition, an exercise in excess, Camden, Miranda replied without looking at him. Her eyes scanned the ceiling. Croft, is the camera at the end of this hallway operational? Yes, ma'am, the security chief confirmed. Then let's review the footage of Mr. Ramos cleaning this lab. A technician brought over a tablet and quickly queued up the video. The hallway appeared on screen, empty at first. Then, Javier came into view, pushing his cart. The timestamp showed 3:10. He unlocked the lab door and went inside. The cart remained in the hallway. For 12 minutes, nothing happened. Then Javier emerged, locked the door, and pushed his cart away. There, Camden said with an air of finality. He's the only one. Keep playing it, Miranda said, her eyes narrowed. The footage continued. The hallway was empty for nearly an hour. Then, at 4:12, a figure appeared, walking from the direction of the main elevator bank. It was a junior executive from Camden's own department, a man named Peterson. He walked briskly down the hall, disappearing from the camera's view in the direction of the lab. 30 seconds later, he reappeared and walked back the way he came. 3 minutes after he vanished, the hazardous material alarm went off. The hallway was silent. Everyone stared at the screen. Camden Pryor's face had gone pale. Peterson was probably just heading to the restroom. It's a coincidence. A coincidence. Miranda's voice was dangerously soft. He works in marketing. What business does a marketing executive have in the R&D wing at 4 in the morning, 3 minutes before a chemical spill alarm is triggered in a lab he just walked past? She turned to face him fully, and for the first time, Javier saw the true, focused fury of the shark. It wasn't loud or emotional. It was cold, precise, and utterly terrifying. You said you found the bottle on his cart, Camden, but my janitor had already left this hallway. So how did a bottle of solvent from the basement get onto his cart, which was on the other side of the building by then? Camden was speechless. The trap he had so carefully laid had just snapped shut on his own foot. He had accounted for everything except Miranda's willingness to look past the obvious, to dig deeper for a man she had every reason to discard. The thought that she could have ruined an innocent man's life based on such a fabrication sent a chill through her. She made her decision. She turned to Croft. Take Mr. Peterson into custody. I want him questioned immediately. Get me his security card access logs for the past 24 hours. She then looked at the 2 guards holding Javier's arms. Let him go. The guards released him instantly. Javier stumbled forward, his legs weak with relief. Mr. Ramos, Miranda said, her voice now crisp and authoritative. You will come with me. She fixed Camden with a final, icy glare. Mr. Pryor, my office, 10 minutes, and I suggest you think very carefully about what you're going to say to me. Without waiting for a response, she turned and strode down the hallway. After a moment of stunned hesitation, Javier scrambled to follow, leaving Camden Pryor standing alone amidst the wreckage of his own failed plot, the flashing red lights illuminating his pale, horrified face. The battle lines had been drawn, and Miranda Ellison had just made it terrifyingly clear which side she was on. Javier followed Miranda down the silent, gallery-like hallway to her office. His legs felt unsteady, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and adrenaline. The heavy doors closed behind them, shutting out the world. The vast, silent office felt different this time, less like a lair and more like a sanctuary. Miranda walked to a small hidden panel in the wall, which opened to reveal a compact kitchenette. Would you like some water? Coffee? She asked, her back to him. The simple human question was so unexpected it took him a moment to respond. Water would be fine, ma'am. Thank you. She brought him a glass of chilled water and gestured for him to sit. She didn't sit behind her desk, the throne of her power. Instead, She leaned against the front of it, creating a sense of parody that was both comforting and deeply unnerving. "Javier," she began, her voice quiet but firm. "First, I want you to know that you are completely cleared of any wrongdoing. The junior executive, Mr. Peterson, has already given a full confession. He was acting on Mr. Pryor's orders." Javier closed his eyes, a shudder of relief so profound it almost buckled him. "Thank you, Miss Ellison. I didn't know what to do." "You did nothing wrong," she continued. "You were targeted. You and your daughter were used as pawns in a corporate power play. It was ruthless, despicable, and it happened under my watch." She looked him directly in the eye. "For that, I apologize." The word hung in the air between them. An apology from Miranda Ellison. Javier was so stunned he couldn't speak. "I was only thinking of Luna," he finally managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "What would happen to her if they took me away?" "She is why this happened," Miranda said, a flicker of something raw in her expression. "Camden saw my interest in her as a weakness. He thought I was compromised. He wanted to force me to choose between protecting you and protecting myself. And you chose me," Javier whispered, the reality of it finally sinking in. "I chose to do the right thing," she corrected gently, "a lesson I've been relearning recently." She pushed off the desk and began to pace. "But this incident has made it clear that your current position is no longer safe. The night shift leaves you isolated, vulnerable. We need to make a change." Javier's heart sank. He thought she meant she had to let him go after all. "I'm creating a new position," she went on, oblivious to his fear. "Logistics and facilities assistant. It's a day shift role, based here on the executive floor. The pay is double your current salary, with full benefits." Javier stared at her, his mind struggling to process it. A day job, double the pay. He could have dinner with Luna every night, take her to school in the mornings. It was everything he had ever dreamed of. "Why?" he asked, the word escaping before he could stop it. "Because talent should be protected," Miranda said simply, "and because families should be able to spend time together. Consider it a strategic investment in a valuable asset." She allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Besides, I can't have one of my key consultants working the night shift." Tears welled in Javier's eyes, and this time, he didn't fight them. "Thank you, Miss Ellison," he said, his voice choked. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept the position," she said. "Your new role begins Monday." 10 minutes later, Javier was gone, and Camden Pryor walked into the office. His face was a thunderous mask of fury. "You have 5 minutes, Camden," Miranda said, now seated behind her desk, the throne reclaimed. She gestured to a tablet on her desk. "On that device is Mr. Peterson's signed confession, detailing your conspiracy to frame an employee and destroy company property. You'll also find the security footage and the chemical requisitions bearing your forged signature." Camden's jaw clenched. "So you're firing me?" "No," Miranda said. "Firing you is too simple. It would make you a martyr to the board members who share your philosophy. You will continue your duties." Confusion crossed Camden's face. "However," Miranda continued, her voice turning to ice, "your access to all R&D projects is revoked. Your security clearance is reduced. Any expenditure over $1,000 will require my signature. You will not speak to Javier Ramos or go near his daughter. If you even look in their direction, the contents of this tablet go to the board, the DA, and the press. You will be ruined. Am I clear?" The color drained from Camden's face. She wasn't just firing him. She was putting him in a cage. He was a shark with no teeth, forced to swim in a tank of his own making while she watched. The humiliation was a fate worse than being fired. He stood there for a long moment, his fists clenched. He looked at her, at the new, unshakable resolve in her eyes. The woman he thought he could break was gone. He gave a curt, jerky nod. "Crystal." He turned and left without another word. Miranda watched him go, knowing this wasn't over. Camden was a cornered animal now, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. As soon as the elevator doors closed, Camden pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts and found the name he was looking for. Alistair Finch, the most powerful and conservative member of Auratech's board of directors, a man who believed Miranda's father was a genius and that she was a pale imitation. Finch answered on the second ring. "She knows," Camden said, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "She's out of control. Promoting janitors, canceling profit-driving initiatives. She's going to run the company into the ground with this sentimental nonsense." He paused, listening. "Yes, I still have the other evidence. The fraud case I was building. It's time. Call an emergency meeting." The emergency board meeting was convened in the top-floor observatory, a circular room with 360-degree views of the city. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Miranda walked in to find the 10 board members already seated, their faces grim. Camden Pryor was at the far end of the table, looking composed and confident. Beside him sat Alistair Finch, a hawk-faced man in his late 60s, whose family had been instrumental in the company's founding. He held the board's loyalty in his iron grip. As Miranda took her seat, she felt a strange sense of calm. She had asked Javier to bring Luna to her office that morning, under the guise of wanting Luna to test a new educational app. Javier had agreed, though the worry in his eyes was evident. Having Luna nearby felt like carrying a secret weapon. Finch began without preamble. "Miranda, this meeting is about your recent leadership. You unilaterally canceled Project Scythe. Then you swept a multi-million-dollar incident in the R&D labs under the rug after promoting the janitor responsible." The janitor was exonerated, Miranda stated evenly. "The victim of a conspiracy." "A conspiracy with no evidence," Finch countered. "All we see is erratic, sentimental behavior that puts this company at risk." Camden chose that moment to strike. "Are they, Miranda?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "Or are you just trying to create a distraction?" He stood and gestured to the main screen. "Ladies and gentlemen, for 6 months I have investigated financial irregularities I hoped I was mistaken about. I was not." On the screen, documents appeared, bank transfers and invoices detailing a kickback scheme funneling millions from Auratech to a shell corporation. Every key document bore Miranda Ellison's digital signature. "The evidence is clear," Camden said with false authority. "Miranda has been embezzling company funds. I believe her recent erratic behavior has been a desperate smokescreen while she bled this company dry." The board members gasped. They stared at the screen, then at Miranda, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning horror. The evidence looked perfect. Too perfect. "This is a lie," Miranda said, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. "These documents are forgeries." "Can you prove that?" Finch challenged, his eyes like chips of flint. "Because what we see here is overwhelming evidence of fraud. I am calling for an immediate vote to suspend Miranda Ellison as CEO and install Mr. Pryor as interim CEO, pending a full criminal investigation." The walls were closing in. Miranda looked at the faces around the table. She saw doubt, betrayal, and in some, a grim satisfaction. Her logic was no match for Camden's mountain of lies. She needed a different kind of logic. She needed an eye that saw patterns, not just proof. "I request a 5-minute recess," she said, standing up. "The vote is on the table, Miranda." "There's nothing more to discuss," Finch said dismissively. 5 minutes, Miranda repeated, her voice ringing with an authority that made him pause. She walked out of the room before he could object. She strode into her office. Luna was sitting on the floor, deeply focused on the AuraPad. Javier stood nervously by the window. "Javier, I need to borrow your daughter," Miranda said, her voice urgent. "Miss Ellison, what's happening?" he asked, his face pale with worry. "I'm being framed. I need Luna's help." I need her to look at a puzzle." She knelt in front of Luna. "Sweetheart, I need your help with a very, very important puzzle. It's in the other room. Can you come with me?" Luna looked up, her eyes wide, and nodded. When Miranda walked back into the boardroom holding Luna's hand, the room erupted. "This is a circus!" Finch exclaimed, rising from his chair. "Have you lost your mind, bringing a child in here?" "My daughter has a unique ability to see patterns," Miranda said, her voice cutting through the noise as she led Luna to the giant screen displaying Camden's fraudulent evidence. "She has saved this company once. I'm betting she can do it again." She crouched beside Luna, pointing at the screen. "Luna, honey, look at all these numbers and words. It's a messy puzzle. Do you see anything that looks like it's wearing a different hat?" Camden laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "This is insane! Security!" But the other board members were silent, watching, captivated by the sheer audacity of the scene. Luna, oblivious to the drama, stepped closer to the screen. She studied the forged financial statements, her head tilted. She scanned the lines of numbers, the paragraphs of text, the official-looking logos. She was quiet for almost a full minute. Then she raised her small hand and pointed. "The numbers," she said softly. "What about the numbers, sweetheart?" Miranda prompted, her heart pounding. "Some of them are fuzzy," Luna said, her finger tracing over a long column of figures. "Like in my game, Data Detective. The man on the game said it happens when you copy a picture of a number instead of typing the number. It makes the edges all soft." She looked up at Miranda. "See? The 8s and the 3s and the 5s are all a little bit fuzzy, but the 7s and the 1s are sharp. Someone was lazy and copied the fuzzy numbers." A dead silence fell over the room. An older tech-savvy board member named Evelyn Reed leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "Magnify that section," she commanded. "Section D, line 12. Enhance 400%. The image on the screen zoomed in on a single number, $8 million. Luna was right. The 1s and 0s were crisp, vector-based characters. But the 8s were different. Their edges were slightly blurred, pixelated. They were images, not text. It was a subtle, almost invisible flaw, an amateur forger's mistake. "My God," Evelyn breathed. "The child's right. These are doctored. They're composites. They're fakes." Every head in the room slowly turned to face Camden Pryor. The color drained from his face. His confident smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure panic. His entire, elaborate conspiracy, months of careful planning and forged evidence, had just been completely dismantled by a 7-year-old girl complaining about fuzzy numbers. Alistair Finch stared at the screen, then at Camden, his face turning a dark, mottled red. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The predator was in the trap, and the cage door had just slammed shut. The silence in the observatory was absolute. Camden Pryor stood frozen, his face the color of ash. Every eye in the room was on him, the weight of their collective shock pressing down on him like a physical force. Miranda's voice, when she finally spoke, was not triumphant. It was cold, clear, and methodical. "The fraud accusation was Mr. Pryor's last desperate move," she said, addressing the stunned board. "His first was to frame an innocent man, Javier Ramos, for destroying company property in an attempt to destabilize my leadership." She gestured to Evelyn Reed, who quickly brought up the security footage from the R&D lab and the signed confession of Camden's subordinate on the main screen. The evidence was irrefutable. "Camden saw compassion as a disease," Miranda continued, her gaze sweeping over the horrified faces of the board members. "He believed that valuing our employees was a weakness he could exploit to seize control of this company. He was wrong. His actions were not for the good of Oratech. They were for the good of Camden Pryor Alistair Finch." His face a mask of humiliation, finally spoke. "Security," he croaked, his voice raspy. "Get him out of here." 2 guards entered the room and approached Camden, who didn't even seem to register their presence. He was still staring at Luna, the small child who had so effortlessly and completely destroyed him. As the guards led him away, his reign of ambition and cruelty ended not with a bang, but with the quiet whisper of a 7-year-old girl. With Camden gone, Miranda turned back to the board. Her authority was no longer in question. It was absolute. "Mr. Finch was right," she said sharply. "I am no longer the CEO I was a month ago. For years we assumed our greatest asset was our technology. We were wrong." She looked around the table. The server crash, the conspiracy, and this fraud were all solved by looking at the one asset we have consistently undervalued: our people. She brought up a new slide, a simple logo with the words Project Aura. "I am scrapping Project Scythe. In its place, I am proposing Project Aura, an initiative to invest in our employees, transparent internal promotion, an on-site child care facility, and a program to identify and nurture unique talents, no matter where we find them." She looked at Luna, who was hugging Javier's leg. "Our next great innovation might not come from an R&D lab," Miranda said, her voice ringing with a new passion. "It might come from a janitor's daughter who sees the world in a way we've forgotten. Our job is not to trim the fat. It is to ensure we never overlook the magic. That is my new vision. I expect your full support." One by one, the board members began to applaud. It started with Evelyn Reed, then spread around the table, until even a humbled and broken Alistair Finch was clapping. It was a complete and total victory. 1 month later, Javier stood in the atrium of the new Aura Tech Child Development Center. Dressed in a crisp shirt and slacks for his new role as logistics and facilities assistant, his janitor's cart felt like a relic. Across the room, Luna showed other children a puzzle on a large screen, her voice confident. She was no longer a shy girl hiding in a break room. She was a leader. "She's a natural," a voice said beside him. Javier turned to see Miranda standing there. She was wearing a simple blue dress, and her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked younger, happier. She looked like herself. "They wanted her to be the first official student," Javier said, a smile spreading across his face. "She designed the welcome puzzle for the other kids." "Of course she did," Miranda said warmly. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the children play. The change in their lives was still sinking in for Javier. He had dinner with his daughter every night. On weekends, the 3 of them, Javier, Luna, and Miranda, went to parks or museums. Miranda's cavernous apartment was no longer empty. Luna's drawings were on the refrigerator, and her teddy bear had a permanent spot on the sofa. It was slowly becoming a home. "Thank you, Miranda," Javier said softly, his voice thick with a gratitude so immense it was hard to put into words. "For everything. You gave us a new life." Miranda turned to him, her blue eyes soft. "You're wrong, Javier," she said. "You and Luna gave me a life. I was just executing functions. You taught me how to live." She looked over at Luna, her expression filled with a fierce, maternal love. "She saved me." In every way that a person can be saved, Luna, sensing their eyes on her, broke away from her new friends and ran over to them. She threw her arms around Miranda's legs in a tight hug. "I like it here," she announced. "Can we come back tomorrow?" "We can," Miranda laughed, stroking her hair. Luna looked up at them, her head tilted as she took in the sight of her father and her hero standing side by side. "You two look like the king and queen at the end of the storybook," she declared. "The part where they get married and make the kingdom a happy place." Javier felt a blush creep up his neck, but Miranda just smiled, her eyes locking with his over Luna's head. In her gaze, he saw the question and the answer all at once. He saw a future he had never dared to imagine. He reached out and took her hand, her fingers laced with his, a perfect, comfortable fit. "Well," Javier said, his voice full of a hope and happiness he hadn't felt since before his wife passed away. "The kingdom is definitely getting happier." Miranda squeezed his hand, her smile brighter than all the city lights. "And the Queen," she said softly, her eyes shining, "is working on the happily ever after part." Together, the three of them stood there, a strange, unlikely, and utterly perfect family, their faces turned toward the sound of children's laughter. The story wasn't over. It was just the beginning. And for the first time, it was a story they were all writing together.